Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Relations between Turkey and Russia continue on favorable terms, as Russia's S-400 missile system deal with Turkey is reportedly nearing its end.
The history of the relations between Turkey and Russia spans centuries, marked by alternating periods of confrontation and cooperation. In the recent years, the two countries have moved closer together under the leadership of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Relations between the two countries took a significant hit in 2015 when a Turkish F-16 aircraft shot down a Russian fighter jet on November 24th during an airspace dispute close to Turkey's border, Syria. Russian President Vladimir Putin described the incident as a stab in the back by the accomplices of terrorists and further stated that this tragic event will have significant consequences for relations between Russia and Turkey. In response to the incident, Russia imposed a set of economic sanctions on Turkey, including the suspension of visa-free travel to Russia for Turkish citizens and restrictions on imports of Turkish products. The day after Turkey's downing of the Russian warplane, member of Russian parliament Sergei Mironov proposed a bill that would criminalize the denial of Armenian genocide, a political move that Turkey strongly opposes. Ties between the two countries started normalizing after Kremlin announced in a statement in June last year that Erdoğan had expressed regret to his Russian counterpart for the shooting of the Russian jet. Following the statement, the Russian government ordered the lifting of restrictions on Russian citizens traveling to Turkey and the normalization of trade ties between the two countries. The newly normalized relations between Turkey and Russia survived another significant hit when Russia's ambassador to Turkey, Andrey Kortunov, was assassinated by an off-duty Turkish police officer on December 19, 2016. The assassination took place after several days of protests in Turkey over Russia's involvement in the Syrian civil war. After having spoken to Putin, President Erdoğan said in a statement that both leaders had agreed that the assassination of Kortunov was an act of provocation by those looking to harm the relations between the two countries. Putin likewise stated that the assassination was, without a doubt, a provocation aimed at spoiling the normalization of Russian-Turkish relations, spoiling the Syrian peace process, which is being actively pushed by Russia, Turkey, Iran and others. Following the incident, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu announced that the street in which the Russian embassy is located would be named after the ambassador. Russia and Turkey have long backed opposite sides in the Syrian civil war, with Turkey openly backing groups fighting against Russian ally Bashar al-Assad. Following a major diplomatic realignment, however, the two countries have coordinated their policies over Syria in cooperation with Iran, in a move that is seen by a major blow for the Western goal of ousting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Although the two countries seem to have deepened their cooperation over Syria, their stances towards the Syrian Kurdish militia People's Protection Units (YPG) are divergent, as Moscow has recently developed a close relationship with the armed group, which Turkey sees as a terrorist organization. The normalization of the ties between Turkey and Russia further continued through the Syria peace talks in Astana, Kazakhstan, on the creation of de-escalation zones in the war-torn region. The recent summit in Sochi, which took place on November 22nd, brought together Putin, Erdoğan, and the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, who agreed to cooperate on pursuing a political solution to the war in Syria. Turkey, a crucial NATO member country, announced in September this year that it had signed a deal to purchase the Russian-made S-400 surface-to-air missile system. This is Turkey's most significant deal with a non-NATO military supplier and comes amid strained relations between Ankara and several Western countries. A top NATO official had warned Turkey in October this year that its purchase of the Russian air defense system would result in necessary consequences. The deal has reportedly been valued about $2 billion and is expected to be finalized before the end of this year. According to reports in Russian media, Vladimir Kozhin, a Russian presidential aide, said yesterday that Russia had completed negotiations with Turkey on the purchase of S-400s. All parameters, all technologies, and the entire deal has been agreed. Practically speaking, the contract is entering the phase of realization. The first deliveries are likely to begin at the end of 2019, beginning of 2012. Kozhin said, according to the Russian media.
After gaining control of the oil fields in the Iraqi Kurdistan region, the Baghdad government is now considering pumping its oil through Iran.
After gaining control of the oil fields in the Iraqi Kurdistan region, the Baghdad government is now considering pumping its oil through Iran, Mahmoud Bozarslan reported for Al Monitor. Under the governance of the Kurdistan regional government, the oil was sold through a pipeline running through the Turkish port of Ceyhan. The move was publicized earlier in the week when the Iraqi oil minister Jaber al-Luaibi announced that Baghdad had signed an agreement to move the Kirkuk oil through Iran. Commenting on the deal, Arez Abdullah, a senior member of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan Party and chairman of the Parliamentary Oil and Gas Committee, told Al Monitor that Iraq is keen to develop its oil and trade relations with Iran. With this agreement, the existing Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline could become irrelevant and inoperative. Abdullah also added that the deal is going to affect Turkey badly. The Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline will remain for the time being. Iraq will assess its profits and may well abandon the Ceyhan line. Meanwhile, the social tension is escalating in the region. In the Kurdish province of Süleymaniye, thousands of people, angry about the continued delay in paying the public sector salaries and lack of public services, took over the streets demanding the resignation of the regional government. The rally started on Monday when protesters attacked the headquarters of the region's 5 political parties and a building of the security services in the city. During the clashes between protesters and security forces, at least 5 demonstrators were reported to have been killed and more than 100 injured. Curfews have now been imposed in some cities in the province. Following the protests, 2 political parties have withdrawn from the Kurdish regional government in Iraq. The Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi stated that Baghdad is determined to audit the list of the KRG state employees before they make any payments, but added that they will make payments to certain groups before they finish the whole data.
Joining us from Moscow, Russia tonight is Andrey Kortunov, who is the Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. Good evening, Mr. Kortunov. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Mr. Kortunov, can you hear me? There has been a problem with our connection. We will have to hold on until we re-establish the connection. Mr. Kortunov, can you hear me? We will continue with our next news video. Mr. Kortunov?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect, you can hear us.
Yes, now I can hear you fine, thank you.
Okay, so welcome to This Week in Turkey, Mr. Kortunov.
Thank you.
So let's start talking about the recent developments in Turkey-Russia relations. So Turkey's downing of a Russian warplane in 2015 and the assassination of Ambassador Karlov last year were both shocking incidents from a Russian point of view. I'd like to ask you, have these 2 issues been resolved in the memory of Russia? In other words, how did Russia deal with these 2 incidents?
Well, first of all, I would say that these are 2 very different incidents. In case of the Russian plane, the order came from Ankara, so the Turkish government could have been held responsible for what has happened. However, in case of the assassination of the Russian ambassador, it was just a terrorist attack, and of course, nobody would think that this attack was somehow orchestrated from the Turkish leadership. So I think that in the first case, the grounding of the Russian airplane, it was a shock, and it took some time for Russians to understand the motives of the Turkish side, and I think that the Turkish side basically handled this issue in a rather benign way. But generally, I have to tell you that even during the worst phase of the relationship, the social connections between the 2 countries remained very strong. And I don't think that there was any kind of animosity towards the Turkish people in Russia. At least I haven't seen anything like that.
And let's now talk a bit about the much discussed S-400 air defense system purchase deal that's going on between Turkey and Russia. And in fact, a Russian official today has stated that the deal is almost finalized. So Turkey is very enthusiastic about purchasing these air defense systems, while NATO is very much alarmed, and Russia is somehow keeping a cool stance. So what, in your opinion, is going on in this triangle?
Well, first of all, I think this is definitely an important political signal that the Turkish leadership sends to NATO, that Turkey is ready to play by its own rules, that it will not take advice from Brussels or from Washington when the Turkish leadership believes that it's not appropriate. It's a major step, and of course it creates a lot of concerns within NATO, because Turkey is an important member of the alliance. It is the member which really is in charge of the whole southern flank of NATO. So definitely this is something that cannot make NATO leaders happy. On the other hand, as far as the Russian-Turkish relations are concerned, definitely it's a sign of a new stage in this relationship, because we have never had such important agreements in the security field with Turkey. Frankly, I think that it's not a done deal. I think that the deal can still crumble, it can collapse, but definitely it is an important development for both sides. It is an important development for Russia, because for the first time Russia exercised its readiness to sell such an state-of-the-art system to a NATO member, and it is an important step from the Turkish side.
Mm-hmm. And let's now talk a bit about Syria and how Russia and Turkey are coordinating their policies in this conflict region. Turkey has shown substantial discontent towards the Syrian Kurdish militant group YPG. Turkey has shown discontent towards the US for its support for the YPG, which Turkey sees as a terrorist organization. But Russia, on the other hand, seems to be developing a close relationship with this group, and even doesn't recognize the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, which is Turkey's own homegrown Kurdish militant group. So Russia and Turkey seem to be on amicable terms recently, although they have much different stances on these Kurdish groups in Syria. So how do you explain this situation? How is Russia able to bypass Turkey's strong sensitivity against these Kurdish groups?
Well, I think that it is definitely not the only question on which the two sides disagree. The future of Bashar Assad, if any, is also an issue which divides Russia and Turkey. But I think that we will never know everything. I think many contacts which take place right now between Russians and Turks are confidential. But I wouldn't be surprised to find out that there are some kind of tacit understanding about the exact level of Russian support to Kurdish groups that would not be a major irritant for Turkey. I'm sure that this issue has been discussed, and I hope that the bridge, that the gap in the perception was, if not breached, at least it was narrowed somehow. Because indeed, you are right. It appears that Turkey is much less concerned about the Russian support to Kurds than it is concerned about the US support to the Kurdish militant groups.
And let's now talk a bit about the Akkuyu nuclear power plant that's scheduled to be built by Russian firms. So this project seems to be on hold recently, as reports suggest that the firm Rosatom has frozen the building process. Can you tell us about what seems to be the main problem here? Is it about financing, or is there a more political background to this pause?
Well, you know, I think it's a very complicated technical project, and there might be problems which have nothing to do with the political relations between the two countries. I think that on the overall scale, the Russian-Turkish energy relationship is rather strong, and we saw, the Turkish Stream developing. Russia is clearly interested in turning Turkey into a major energy hub in the region. But I think that if you take such a complex deal as we have with the power plant, the devil is in details, and sometimes it's about the legal issues which have to be resolved. Sometimes it's about maintenance. Sometimes it's about offset, how much of this project should be outsourced to Turkish companies. So, frankly, our experience suggests that such deals evolve rather slow, and I wouldn't over-dramatize the current complications.
Mm-hmm. And let's now talk a bit about the leaders of the two countries, namely Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan. There seems to be an unusual synergy between these two leaders, as they've met 3 times within a month's time. So what do you think is going on here? How do you explain this interesting connection between the two leaders?
Well, I think that there is some natural chemistry between the two, because both are strong leaders, both like to take full responsibility for what they're doing. You can even argue that both are authoritarian in the style in which they run their countries. So I think that they might like each other, but it's definitely more than just a personal relationship. I think that both leaders believe that they were quote-unquote betrayed by the West. Both feel concerned about the current Western policies. Both are disappointed in their relations with the European Union for a variety of reasons, maybe very different reasons. But nevertheless, I think that what is important here is that the view on the world that Erdogan and Putin have, this view is very close. They are both tend to be nationalistic. They are both transactionalists in a way. Both appeal to history of their respective countries. So I think that that helps, that they speak the same language.
Mm-hmm. A very popular theme in the Western media nowadays is populism and how it's gaining currency not only in the US but around the globe. And two of the figures that often come up in this domain are Putin and Erdogan. We see many of their photos together during discussions of populism in the Western media. So do you think these two leaders really belong in the same category? Are they the same type of politician?
Well, of course, we should keep in mind that Russia and Turkey are two very different countries. If you take the social structure, if you take history, there are many distinctions between the two. But I would argue that with all the differences notwithstanding, Russia and Turkey are what I would call semi-peripheral countries. They are trying to somehow enhance their positions in the world. They feel rejected by the West. And I think that both leaders, whether we like it or not, but both leaders enjoy a lot of support, especially among ordinary people. Both are criticized by respective intellectuals. Putin is criticized quite often by intellectuals in Russia. Erdogan is criticized by intellectuals in Turkey. But ordinary people, so to say, blue collars or people living in small towns in rural areas, they support both Putin and Erdogan. So you can say that they are populists. However, I would argue that in certain cases they are much more than populists, because both are able to maintain public support for a long period of time, which doesn't happen often with populists. Usually populists rise and then they fall. It's not what we see with Putin and Erdogan.
Mm-hmm. You've just underlined that both leaders somehow face a rejection and criticism by the West. And a widespread view on Turkey, actually, is that it's broken away from its traditional Euro-Atlantic orientation, and that it is now shifting towards a more Eurasianist direction led by Russia. How is this claim perceived in Moscow, and does the Kremlin really expect Turkey to move in this direction?
Well, I think that they wouldn't say that it's either or, and of course they would not recommend to Ankara what Ankara should do. It's a decision that has to be made in Turkey. But definitely this drift of Turkey away from Europe and closer to Eurasia is something that fits very nicely into the picture of the role that Putin has, because he believes that there are other options, that Europe is no longer the only option available. And I think that in the evolution of Turkey, he might see yet another confirmation of his views.
Mr. Kortunov, thank you very much for your comments and for being with us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
The fifth hearing of the Cumhuriyet trial will be held at the Istanbul 27th Heavy Penal Court next week.
The fifth hearing of the daily Cumhuriyet trial on terror-related charges, in which 5 of the 20 defendants are jailed, will be held at the Istanbul 27th Heavy Penal Court next week. 5 defendants, including Cumhuriyet Editor-in-Chief Murat Sabuncu, prominent reporter Ahmet Şık, CEO Akın Atalay, and accounting employee Emre İper, are still in prison in the Silivri district in Istanbul. 2 of the journalists, the daily's former editor-in-chief Can Dündar and İlhan Tanır, are in exile. The defendants are charged with supporting the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK, Gülen Movement, FETÖ, and the Revolutionary People's Liberation Party Front DHKPC. Prison sentences requested by the state prosecutor ranged from 7.5 years to 43 years. 4 hearings have been held in the trial so far. The next hearing will be held on December 25th and 26th.
Turkey's Eastern Express, which operates between Ankara and the eastern province of Kars, has become more popular than ever before.
The Eastern Express that sets off from the capital Ankara and heads for Kars in the eastern region has never been so popular. The train, which arrives at its destination in 24 hours, is the new tourist attraction in Turkey. The popularity of the destination among domestic and international tourists resulted in a shortage of tickets. Tickets for the express sell out 15 minutes after they go on sale, and the authorities have announced that 13,000 people are waiting in line for the next train. The main opposition party, CHP deputy Zeynep Altıok, has claimed that tour companies buy tickets in bulk and resell them in the black market. Although the Minister of Transport, Maritime Affairs and Communication has announced that more wagons will be added to the express, this may not be enough to meet the growing demand. Tour operators that organize tourist traveled cars with the Eastern Express have said that they can open spots for only 50 people for trains that are supposed to set off in 2 months. Kars, which also welcomes tourists that come to the city through airlines and by bus, is swarming with visitors. It has been reported that all hotels and hostels in the city are currently overbooked by tourists. The city welcomed 279,000 tourists last year, and this number will likely spike in 2017 and 2018. The Eastern Express sets off from the Ankara train station every day for Kars via provinces including Kayseri, Sivas, Erzincan and Erzurum, and arrives at its destination in 24 hours and 30 minutes. Between January 1st and December 18th, 271,100 20 people took the train from Ankara to Kars. The Eastern Express features seated coaches, couchette coach, and sleeping coaches with toilets, a minibar and a table.
The Ministry of Culture has reportedly not purchased any books from publishing companies this year due to budgetary constraints.
Turkish media reported on Tuesday that the Ministry of Culture and Tourism has not purchased any books from publishing companies this year due to budgetary constraints. According to the reports, the ministry's accounts for the year 2017 were already closed down, and therefore no purchases would be made from publishing companies. The ministry responded to the reports by stating that it has already purchased 6,110 books this year, worth a total of 12,390,000 Turkish liras. The ministry added that these books were currently in the process of being shipped to libraries. Following the reports, a ministry official has said that starting from early 2018, the ministry would make larger purchases from publishing companies in order to support them. The Ministry of Culture and Tourism makes annual book purchases to support publishing companies financially.
Now let's take a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Chantal, the German DJ known for his contributions to various fanfares and Balkan orchestras, as well for his song Disco Partizani, whose clip was shot in Istanbul, is at Babylon tonight.
Paskir, kömür, plastik, çöplük, lastik, egzoz, esrar. İspaskir, kömür, plastik, çöplük, lastik, egzoz, esrar. İspaskir, kömür, plastik, çöplük, lastik, egzoz, esrar. İspaskir, kömür, plastik, çöplük, lastik, egzoz, esrar. İspaskir, kömür.
Ezel, the new star of Turkish rap, is in concert at Durak X tomorrow. Do not miss it. The celebrated Turkish pianist Fazıl Say will be at the Volkswagen Arena this Sunday to play his new album Yürüyen Köşk. The Team Show Center Maslak hosts the famous Bolshoi Ballet each night during this weekend. The ballet company attached to the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, which was founded in 1776. Most of the dancers are from the Moscow State Choreographic Academy, a privileged breeding ground for the troupe.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.